This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hello, this is Kathy King from For Flux Sake, and Matt, Rose, and I want to send our love and support out to all the artists, potters, sculptors, and craftspeople impacted by Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina. Though this event occurred weeks ago, there are so many individuals still struggling to rebuild. If you are in a position to do so, please consider donating to the Craft Emergency Relief Fund. You can go to surfplus.org to learn more. Thank you. Hello, my name is Kathy King, and welcome to the For Flux Sake podcast. I'm coming to you from the Harvard Ceramics program in our fair city, Allston, Massachusetts. I'm here with Rose and Matt Katz of the world-famous Ceramic Materials Workshop, and they are ready to answer your burning questions about clay and glaze. Welcome, my girthly borate ghoulies and min-spar monsters. Arise from your places of eternal slumber, and welcome to a very spooky edition of our newest For Flux Sake segment, Fluxed Up. We talk to makers about what they do and how they suffer, because one thing is true in ceramics: no matter how good you are, how much experience you have, we have all fluxed something up in the studio. I am the creepy and oftentimes catastrophic Kathy King, and today I am joined by the macabre and often morose Matt Katz and the brilliant bride of Katzenstein, Rose Katz. Today we welcome our esteemed guest, the absolute maker of monsters of contemporary ceramic art, Brett Kern. Welcome, Brett.
Hi there. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm real happy to be here.
So, Brett, give us the 411 of what you do.
I currently am living the dream in Pittsburgh.
Ooh.
I do mostly slipcast work. I'm the dinosaur guy. People call me that for obvious reasons. But yeah, right now I'm just a full-time artist. I used to teach at a college down in West Virginia. And about 7 years ago, I quit, bought a house, and now I just work out of my house with my 4 cats, my wife, and I've been making a living just selling art. So it's been perfect, and like I said, living the dream.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so I have 20 questions for you, but it's not really 20 questions, but we're just going to quick fire, okay?
Okay.
So, all right, what temperature do you do?
I do low fire, so cone 06, 05. Bisco 4.
What clay body do you use? Custom, commercial?
I used to make my own casting slip. And it was great back when I taught at a college because I could kind of use the materials that the school had. But when I moved to Pittsburgh, and I sort of mathematically figured out how much it would cost to buy the raw materials and make it myself, or just buy the pre-made slip from Standard, and it's actually cheaper to buy the pre-made slip.
Really?
So,
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah, and you're in Standard's backyard too.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah. Whenever I need anything, I just drive on over to Standard, so it's pretty easy. So I just use it's like low fire artist white is what it's called.
Okay. So what technique do you do for making?
I do slip casting, so I make all my own molds, and I've got my slip casting tables and molds all around me, and yeah, and it's just primarily slip casting. But for some sculptures and stuff, I just do traditional sculpture. I've done that before, where you're just molding it and sculpting it out of clay and then hollowing it out. And I came up with pottery. When I got into ceramics, I thought I was going to be a potter. And it wasn't until about my third year of grad school that I started getting into slipcasting and sculpture.
Wow.
Interesting.
Been there.
Just in
lived that.
time to graduate.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
all had those dreams of being a potter, and
Yeah.
then we woke
Yeah.
up a little bit.
Wood fire kiln, 7 golden retrievers out in the woods. Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so what problems do you struggle with in your studio?
So I don't know if this is heresy with such glaze masters, but I use commercial glazes.
Good
Nothing
on
wrong
you.
with that.
No, nothing wrong with that at all.
No, so sometimes like you'll have an issue and you just don't know how to fix it because you don't know what the recipe is, you don't know how to change the recipe. So if you do have an issue, sometimes you just have to kind of deal with it or experiment around it. Recently I guess this is a first of Flux Up. Recently I was just trying to find some like new glazes, and there was like this Mako glaze. It's this beautiful like emerald green translucent glaze. It's gorgeous. And I lined my pots like I usually do with like a clear liner, or my dinosaurs like I usually do with a clear liner. And I sprayed this green glaze all over it, fired it, and every single piece just cracked right in half.
Oh,
So probably like 20 pieces or so just cracked right in half. I wasn't expecting that to happen, or I wouldn't have glazed all of them. So I mean, like, and that was a pretty simple fix, because all I do now is I just have to line it with the green glaze itself. So, and now that has worked.
I love that you stuck with the green glaze. That would have been
We're all much more fatalistic than that.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty glaze.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
No, there's nothing wrong with using commercial glaze. Commercial glazes, it's all the same stuff that we use. And, especially looking at your work, and this is a really important conversation for all makers, of making something that is so insanely glossy, which a lot of the work that you're making has that high gloss, high sheen look of. I often tell our students, making a clear gloss is, I always say, the third hardest glaze in all of glaze chemistry, because the number 1 is tomato reds, number 2 is crystalline, and number 3 is a clear gloss. Because when you need to get obsessed with how glossy is your gloss glaze, it is an impossible rabbit hole. And so to have something out there that works solves so many problems with what should theoretically be a simple glaze. But they got the chemistry down, the processing down, the suspension down, and then it can make it a lot more simple.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I never was a big fan of mixing my own glazes anyways.
Oh no, there's your problem.
I took the glaze chemistry classes. I did it all, but I want to spend my time actually making work rather than fluxing around with glazes usually.
Well, but it does lead to a particular challenge. Now, you mentioned you're using commercial casting slip. Yeah. And at low temperature, of course, one of the things that some people in our audience know is that we've gone through this crisis recently with talc in especially low temperature casting slips. And looking at your process, you've got a casting slip, which is pretty classic for low temperature, which was gray before it was fired. And that's the classic sign that talc was in that body, because the Pioneer talc that everyone was using was very, very gray. It fires white, so if anybody who thinks it doesn't fire white, it would fire white, but it starts gray. But did you see a lot of problems when that change happened, or did the company handle it okay?
I know Graham, the head of standard, pretty well. And so he kind of called me and warned me like, hey, we're running out of talc. We're not going to be doing that same clay body anymore. So so I worked with him, and I bought about a year's supply of casting slip from him just in case. And then in that meantime, he gave me some casting slips they were working on to test. And so I got to actually cast with them, see how my glazes fit on them, and make sure everything was going to be okay. And by the time I transitioned to the new casting slip, there were no issues at all. I just moved straight to it.
Oh, that's cool.
It's good to be you. Yeah.
You do have to ultimately prepare. We talked with Lisa Orr on this show, and she has talc in her body from the talc mine before Texas talc came around.
Yeah.
And she has stashed 16 tons of it to make sure to have that talc. So
Wow.
what you
Amazing.
did was nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was and actually I like this clay body now more than what I was working with. It releases from the molds faster, it's maybe a little bit easier to work with. And it doesn't there was another issue that I had with my dinosaurs when I would line so I squirt a clear glaze inside of it, shake it around, and then kind of shake out the glaze. And if the glaze pooled too much in like one of the arms or legs, the clay body would just crack right in half there. Which that doesn't seem to be an issue with this because
Nice.
I haven't had it happen since I switched clay bodies. I don't break open each piece to see if the glaze pooled anywhere. So I don't know, but
You wouldn't be selling much then, would you?
Right.
yeah, but I haven't had an issue.
Glazing the inside of an inherently closed piece, especially with all the appendages that you have, that can be really difficult, much less getting a complete coverage. For folks who don't know what we're talking about, so Brett's making these beautiful, mostly dinosaur shapes, although I love the ichthyosaur. We have a son who still at 13 says he wants to be a paleontologist, so he's down, man. That are enclosed, basically completely enclosed. And one of the common problems, and we see this in pots too, people associate with sculpture more, but is because you're glazing the outside, and historically a lot of people don't glaze the inside, you create a discrepancy of stress because the outside will have a compression tension relationship with the glaze, and then the inside doesn't have any alternative force to combat that. And so when the stress gets applied, the body will just crack, and we call it Dunting, right? So when pots spontaneously fail, and you classically see it when you glaze one side and not the other, or use two completely different glazes, which is the interesting one you caught up on the green glaze that you had the clear gloss that was working for your other glazes, but then with the green, it didn't work, but you glaze the inside with the green, and all of a sudden it works because you're then normalizing the stress because obviously the clear had a different stress. And that's really important concept that
doing equal stresses on both sides.
Equal stresses, right. Because every single glaze out there has got a different thermal expansion than every other glaze. And so if they're close enough, you don't get any stress and it'll be fine, which is what's happening with the clear glaze and your other glazes. But if the discrepancy in stress is too much, then it's just going to crack and pop to relieve that stress. So that was really smart to glaze it with the same glaze. That would have been exactly the advice we would have given you.
Well, thank you.
Hey, I have a question about another line that you have, which are the luster pieces. And I've always wondered, do you just have 5-gallon buckets of luster back there in your studio? What is your process? How do you do it?
I just buy, here's another issue. I buy the Mako lusters.
Okay.
Which to me, I've tried a few, and to me the Mako lusters were the best that I could find for what I was trying to do. And so I would buy just those little 2 ounce, I think they are 2 gram
2 grams
bottles.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I would just fly through those, I yeah. So I wish I had gallon buckets of it, but no, I just have those little things.
Wow. And are you spraying it, or are you just brushing it?
I'm just brushing it. I'm brushing it. I found maybe over a decade ago, I found these paintbrushes at Michael's that cost $1 for 20 of them. And they're just the most perfect, softest brushes for applying luster.
Really?
And I thought I was about to run out of them. I was down to 1, and my wife went to this used art store in Pittsburgh and found another 5 of them. So I think I'm good to go for another decade or 2.
Nice.
But yeah, they're just the cheapest, but they're just perfectly soft, and they don't push the luster out of the way as you're applying it. And I just slowly put luster over the whole piece. And the secret though, and I've posted about this a few times, that I had to figure out because like sometimes it comes out a little splotchy, cloudy, the luster.
That's why I was asking. Yeah.
I buy silver polish and I polish it afterwards and it gets rid of all that. Yeah.
Really?
Oh, like a Brasso silver type thing?
It's silver cream polish. But like you can get it at Walmart, Lowe's, and it just comes in a little tub. There's like a little microfiber sponge in there. And you just go to the sink and you polish it up and you can polish out scratches, the cloudiness, everything. It just makes the luster
Wow.
pop.
Oh, that's
Heard
cool.
that before.
Yeah, I wonder why that would be. Like, why would that?
That's an interesting question. I mean, gold
Yeah.
luster or any of the metallic lusters are putting a thin film of gold on it. Like what they are is that they soak literal precious metal, usually in an acid like hydrochloric acid, that makes a salt, and then they put it in an oil medium. And when you put it on, you're essentially putting on the gold, and then the oil acts as a reducing agent. So when you fire it again, it reduces it. So there is an actual layer of metal, but it's supposed to be embedded into the glass, like it's on superficially on the glass. But that's why if you ever like have a dinner plate with a gold rim and you put it in the microwave, it'll spark like you put a utensil in there because it's actual metal. So I would assume that the polish is actually polishing that very thin layer of actual gold, that maybe there's some that hasn't bonded quite as hard. And yeah, that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it was one of those things like a piece came out crappy and I was like, well, what do I have to lose? I'll just try this. And it worked.
Great.
That is growth through failure. I love that.
There you go. It's what it's all about.
But well, on the tragedy side of it though. So yeah, part of this conversation is also coming because we're recording this after the announcement that Mako has discontinued their luster line. So that must be stressful if you had to luster something right now. But
yeah, well, I as soon as I heard the news, I went on and bought a handful of bottles.
Did you get it?
Yeah, I got it.
Because there were, I will say, there were a lot of reports of people putting in orders and getting them canceled, which is not cool from the supply. I can't say which supply companies were doing it, but I saw that multiple times on social media.
I'll tell you what, I don't think anyone could have ordered luster faster than me after seeing that news. So I think I got
finger
first dibs.
on the pulse. Yeah.
Yeah, so I did order the Laguna lusters, and I've been trying those out, which those show promise. The gold's not quite as thick as I like, but they have a palladium luster, which actually my first test came out real promising, which is great because the Mako and Duncan silver luster had like gone down in quality, and I had to stop using that years ago.
I never liked silver. I used to do a lot of luster when I was in grad school, and I never liked the silver. It was never as good.
I get mine from Maryland China Company, and they have like a really nice array of, they've got like violet and green and mother pearl and all sorts of different color lusters in addition to the gold and palladium, but it's expensive as hell, but yeah.
Isn't it all?
Mm-hmm.
I talked to Brian Hopkins recently, and he's been getting his off of Alibaba, so I need to try that out.
Well, the interesting thing is if you read what Mako published, the first thing that they say is it's not their luster. They weren't making it. They weren't even packaging it. And it sounds like they were just rebuying someone else's luster, and it was very vague, but it was like quality control issues with what they were getting. So points to them for not continuing to sell a product that was suboptimal. And yeah, it probably means that it's just people have to search because there are international sources with it. Alibaba's one of them. I mean, it's certainly a place to get some of the things. I'm pretty skeptical about some of the stains people are finding out there. But, if it works, it works.
You're skeptical about everything now.
Well,
it's okay.
Maybe. Test. So tell us another creepy story from your studio, like
horror story.
Creepy story. I've got like two big ones I can think of. The first most recent one. So I moved here in 2017, and I kind of went into debt just something with getting into the house. They kind of strung me along for a little bit. So all the money I had saved up for when I moved into the house was gone.
Oh.
And so I needed some money. I started making some work, but I wanted to do a pre-sale, the first pre-sale I had ever done, just to, get some money, and then I can make the work and I can actually kind of pay my bills and stuff. And so I took the pre-sale, sold about like 670 pieces I had to make.
Wow.
And yeah, it was good. So I'm making them, and the first couple months I'm making them, and I got like, I don't know, I made like 300 before I started like glazing them. I was just thinking, like, if I just focus on one spot, it'll be faster, and then I can go focus on glazing. Well, anyways, I glaze up like 100 of them, and I put them in the kiln, and they come out and they start shivering. Like the glaze around some of the edges just starts falling off. And I had already sent out an email that like the first 100 people are going to get there soon. They start like, and then some of them didn't shiver. I'm like, well, let's see if they're okay. I luster them. I finish them. They go in the luster kiln. They come out. They shivered. Yeah. And I'm like, well, geez, I'm back to square one if this doesn't work. So yeah, just like months of work and everything. I just had to chuck in a dumpster. But eventually, like, I still don't know what the problem was. Like, I was using Amico glazes at the time, and Stephen Creech was good. He sent me a few white glazes to test. But the solution I found was, and it's like real weird, but it's just I would spray on a layer of black glaze just to give like a different base than just a white clay. Gives it a little bit more depth. Then I'd spray on 2 layers of Amico white, and then I would have to spray on 1 layer of Dunting white, and then the shivering stopped. So something about just putting the Dunting on at the end sealed it all up.
You said you started with the black.
Yeah.
Was it a glossy black? Was it satin?
Yeah, it was their F1, I think. So their F series, Amico's F series is discontinued now, but it was like the F1 black glaze. And it's kind of it's glossy, but it's not too juicy. It's a little drier. But that was just like because originally I had done some pieces, and like when I sprayed just the white glaze on it, it just looked too plain. It looked like kind of a toilet almost, so
We call that after dinner wear.
yeah. So spraying the black glaze on first gave it that depth, and then where it like breaks over the creases with a little bit of black, and yeah, it looked cool.
That's interesting. So shivering, right, is actually the same problem as Dunting. They are exactly the same problem. It's just that when it dunts, it goes all the way through the clay body and it fails. And when it just shivers, which is literally as you're saying, just chunks of glaze falling off. But the interesting thing when it's shivering, for people who have ever seen it, when you pick up the chunk of glaze, there's a little bit of body generally stuck to it.
Yeah.
And that's because the body is just cracking sideways, sort of behind the glaze, instead of just going straight through the body. And that's what we call a dunt. But it's the same problem. And it's the same solution, like I was just saying, of like it's that thermal expansion problem. But you could have it on just one side. That is fascinating. So it ended up being 4 layers of 3 glazes was your solution.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah. And I usually put like spray 4 layers on most of my pieces anyways, 3 or 4, depending on.
Just as a buildup?
Well, it's something with, they're just not thick enough unless, because they all have that like gum solution in them. So when you spray it on, they appear thicker than really, but then when they dry, it's pretty thin. So yeah, I just have to build up 3 layers to actually get a proper thickness when I'm spraying.
So you just do a spray coat, let it dry, do a spray coat, let it dry.
Yep. You can see there's my spray booth. There's the fan. There's my drying fan.
I love a good spray. You're speaking my language. I'm a sprayer and a slipcaster in myself. So it's the right way to be. Everybody else with the wheel and the high temperature. It's too much stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Matt's trying to get a spray booth in the barn in our studio.
I want a waterfall.
You can't find one the right size. It's either like car sized or
They're
like
huge.
teeny
Right,
tiny.
right.
You know?
Talk about shopping from China. They're all
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You need to go to
They
Alibaba.
take up half the workshop.
See that left on your doorstep. Yeah.
That I will have to say, I have never heard anyone doing that as a solution of putting down multiple layers of multiple glazes to alleviate the stress. You don't do that anymore, right? That was just that time.
That was just that specific piece, basically. Yeah. So I don't do that anymore.
How did you figure that out?
I
Like,
know, right?
oh my gosh, there's so many different like variables with that process. It's amazing.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
I think I would have like thrown everything out.
Yeah.
I
You seem
would've
like a
given up.
very patient
Yes.
man.
Well, I don't know. You're not hearing about like the 5 days of like deep depression in between throwing all those pieces away and figuring out a solution.
Oh,
So
yeah.
True that.
I mean, what I'd have to assume is, again, it's this conversation of thermal expansion and right, all the materials we have expand and contract. And it's exactly what I had said earlier about like, you get the inside and the outside, and two different glazes are going to have two different thermal expansions. And it sounds like I'm just speculating on it, but that by using those three different glazes, they each have contrasting thermal expansion. People assume like, oh, you layer glaze, it all just melts together. No, when you layer a glaze, they're in the process of melting together, but they're still definitely different strata of glaze application. So it sort of sounds like you're just building. You're blowing my mind here, Brett.
Stumping us.
Theoretically, I don't know how we would measure this, but theoretically, what you're doing is building up a sandwich of glaze where you're allowing the difficult thermal expansion of one glaze to be balanced off with the other one. And the fact that it worked and the fact that it didn't show any evidence of crazing, because all your work is craze free, and that it relieved the stress, that is really, really interesting as an answer.
You're a magic man.
you have a much more technical explanation. Mine was, I guess I'll try this. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Well, that's valid. Yeah. Now, you said you had two creepy stories. Do you have the second one for us?
The second one's not, it's getting fluxed up with like selling your work, basically. So it's not a glaze issue. But I remember, so this is when I first moved from Montana. I was at Red Lodge Clay Center. I moved to Elkins, West Virginia to teach as adjunct at this college there, getting paid nothing. Like even at the time I was doing clothes modeling at the art center for $10 an hour, just like kind of sleeping there while people drew me. Like that's the kind of stuff I was doing just to make any money. And so they're telling me like, oh, in Christmas there's this like big sale. There's this sale at the art center. So if you make some pots for it, you'll probably sell a lot of stuff. I'm like, okay. I hadn't started doing the dinosaurs or anything yet. So I didn't really know what I was gonna do. I'm just making pots. And so I spent this whole semester, I'm teaching, I'm eating one sub on the weekends because I don't have any money.
Oh.
If you get a $5 footlong, you eat one half the one day, the second half the next day.
Wow.
So I'm working this whole semester making all these pots. I don't know, I must have made like 100 pots or so. I go and I have the sale. It's $60 to rent a table. I sold one cup for $35. And that was it. And I had to skip my uncle's funeral for it because I was like, I can't afford gas to leave. And I theoretically need to sell these pieces. I obviously didn't know I wasn't going to sell anything. But sold 35 or made $35. Didn't even make my fee back.
What were these people buying? I mean, were anyone buying anything? Like calico pot holders?
Yeah, I think that's it. Scarves, maybe a few scarves. So yeah, I just dumped all those in the dumpster. So I didn't have any other way to sell them at the time. But about 2 months later, I made my first inflatable dinosaur mold. So
And you said,
happy
take
ending.
that, suckers.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's a scary step. And once you find something that, that is engaged with an audience, Rose and I went through the same thing. We do this all on our own. We don't work for the universities. We don't do any of that. And to have that level of confidence, but also, like you said, to have to get out a kiln load of work to be able to support yourself in those types of failures. That's why we do this show, because there are people out there doing it, but it doesn't stop just because you're a professional. Like, we're still all suffering.
Well,
Oh,
flux
yeah.
something up.
Look at you now, Brett Kern. Look at you
thanks.
now.
Yeah.
Gotta feed those cats.
Oh.
Yep. Oh,
Dad, which is Brett's most important. I brought our cat on camera for people who can't see her.
and
Now
a,
he's-
and
now
a
he's
black
adorable.
cat, perfect for the season.
know.
perfect.
It
Perfect.
is.
That's good luck in our house, a black
It
cat.
is. It
All we
is.
have
Yeah.
are black cats.
Ooh,
Like
double
2
good
of
luck.
them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Literally, when we
Yeah.
went to adopt the first one, the person at the desk at the adoption agency said, "The black one? Really?"
Yeah. And I
Oh.
said, yes, she's
People
amazing.
are so weird.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, it's not good luck. I was like, yeah, I'll take her.
She's definitely got catitude. I mean, the person wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
She's sassy.
Well, Brett, we are at time, but thank you so much for sharing all your spooky stories with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Brett.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I feel like I learned something.
Yay!
We learned
Can't help
something
it. That's why I do
New
it.
discoveries.
Mhm. Take care, everybody. Happy
Thanks.
Halloween.
Bye.
Well, folks, that's it for this week's episode of For Flux Sake. I'd like to thank the listeners who submitted questions this week, and if you want your question answered on the show, shoot us an email at ForFluxSakePodcast@gmail.com. So join us next time, and when in your studio, remember what Rose always says.
Always remember to test, test, test. This is a test of the emergency glaze system.